Hello and welcome to Party of 5.5.
Welcome.
Rebecca?
Yes.
When I say the word museum, what goes through your mind?
Wasp.
Wasp. What does that mean?
Because one time you surprised me and took me to the Wasp Museum, which I thought was about little tiny wasps with little tiny wings, but it's not about that. It's like the women in aviation.
Isn't it out in West Texas somewhere in the middle of nowhere?
It's in Sweetwater next to Abilene.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so cool. It was like a surprise. We drove all day. We stopped at a fun place to eat in Abilene. I don't remember the name of that place, but it was cute. And then
it was a little cafe.
Yes. Yeah. We drove up to the Wasp Museum, which I thought was going to be about flying critters.
So what was it about?
Other flying critters, actually. Women in aviation, which I thought was so cool. And there was like tons of things there that were, I remember it was not air conditioned. So there's
it was more of a warehouse thing. They were building a whole new warehouse with new stuff. So it was for World War II, right?
Yeah. Yes. It was really cool. It was like the role that the women played and how they were great pilots also. They just didn't get quite the recognition for it, but they even would fly and pull the target practice flags for
they had the target practice flags where they were shooting from the ground at them.
Right.
It was just like what do you call it? Paintballs, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It's still that's kind of crazy. Yeah.
I know. And they were supposed to be just like phenomenal pilots. I'm sure they were.
Okay, you have the Wasp Museum.
Mm-hmm.
The museum I think of first is the Action Figure Museum.
Okay. Where's that?
It's in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma.
We got to get out more.
Okay. And what's funny about this is for 30 years, we have family that live in Oklahoma City. So for 30 years, we've been driving back and forth.
Yes.
And I have seen that billboard for 30 years. And every time we drive by it, I'm like, Rebecca, should we go this time? Do we have time to go to the Action Figure Museum?
And every time I say,
no, not this time.
Not this time.
So there was one time when Drew was at Oklahoma State going to college, I went up and visited him.
Mm-hmm.
So I was all by myself.
Perfect time.
Yep. As I was driving back home, I'm like, I'm doing this now. Rebecca can't stop me.
And I'm so glad you did that without me.
And what's funny, the kids are older now, and I don't think they would get much out of it. But if our kids were like 8, 10, and 12, they would love this museum.
Really?
It's like you go in and it's nothing but obviously action figures. And it's got different rooms with Batman, Superman, and all these different things. So I thought it was really cool. Mm-hmm. I drove down into downtown Pauls Valley.
Right. Which is where I would have gone to find a local coffee shop.
Yeah, there's a cute coffee shop there too. But I was laser focused. And it was funny when I went in to buy the ticket, they seemed surprised that I was there and they were buying a ticket. Because I didn't have any kids with me. Oh, the only people that were there were parents with kids. So they were like, okay, yeah, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So that would be one that we didn't both experience, but that was one of my favorites.
Right.
So do you have another favorite museum?
Another favorite one that I actually would like to revisit now that I feel like I have ramped up my study of the Old Testament is the Bible Museum in DC. Yeah. Really cool museum. And I think I would even now I think we went 4 years ago, something like that. I think even now I would have even a greater appreciation for it. I feel like my biblical history knowledge is exploded in the past couple of years. So I would like to go back.
That's a super cool one.
Yeah.
And for me, this isn't really a museum. My other choice is the Sagrada Familia.
Yeah.
Which is a cathedral in Barcelona.
Right.
I guess we're kind of country dropping now that we've been in Spain. We've been to Spain a couple times. You know how that goes.
It's really the only international country I've ever been to.
Yeah, you've gone with me on a couple of work trips to Barcelona.
Right.
And the Sagrada Familia is just this. Some would say it's monstrosity because Gaudi built it, and it has weird, extreme impressionist statues, and it's just things you wouldn't think of in a cathedral.
That's right.
And they've been working on it for over 100 years now, and it's not technically done yet.
Yeah.
So I just like that it's so different.
Yeah.
So that's why I like that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, then you're gonna love this guest we have on today.
I think I am.
Yes, you will. You're gonna nerd out. His name is Russ Ramsey. He's an author. He's a pastor. and he is a art connoisseur, and he's got his little Rolodex of art that he loves, as do you and as do I, which is one thing I learned today, and that's perfectly fine.
It can be different.
It
doesn't
can
have
be
to the
different.
same.
It can
Yep.
be different. So we hope you enjoy this interview with Russ Ramsey. Well, thank you again for taking time to talk to Hardy Five and a Half. I know that you probably have a busy schedule, so we appreciate you taking a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you for your persistence in reaching out. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Excited to talk to you. So how did you become, did art become so important to you?
It started when I was really in middle school and high school. I found that a lot of the friends that I kind of was drawn to tended to be kids who drew and liked to draw things.
Mm-hmm.
And then in art classes, especially in middle school and high school, I had art teachers that really, this is small town Indiana, farming community, but our art teachers were really interested in helping us develop a lifelong relationship with the arts. And so they would do more than just give us projects to do, but they would teach us about artists and techniques and basically tell us stories. And then in high school, my art teacher in high school gave us this advice, which has proven, here, 35 years later, proven to be true. And that is, she said, if you want a lifelong appreciation with art, just find an artist that you connect with and then pay attention to them for the rest of your life. And they will, they'll introduce you to their colleagues when you go visit them at a museum, and you'll read little plaques on the wall, and they'll introduce you that way to their mentors. And so from Van Gogh, I found my way to Rembrandt, another Dutch painter, and all these years later now, I've just kind of accumulated this knowledge base, but also just familiarity with a lot of works of art, and they've kind of become part of the permanent collection that I carry around inside of me, wherever I go. So that's kind of how that happened. I was never I wasn't an art major in college, and all of my research in art has just been kind of on my own through reading and researching online and in libraries and stuff like that, used bookstores. And but I found that it really it's very helpful for me as a person and as a pastor and as a writer to be putting myself in the path of beautiful things on a regular basis. It's been very important to the formation of who I am and how I move through the world,
Yeah.
Well, and I was one of those. I was one of the drawers. I was the doodler and the
friends.
artist, and you would probably hung out with me because I was the one doing the drawing. And as a kid, I got enamored with Rembrandt. That's where I started. And I redid, like for art class, I would redo his paintings and all that, or try to, So that's where Rembrandt is really where I got started in art. So, and comic books and all that, but like the high art was Rembrandt for me. So
yeah.
So
was there a particular painting or two that for Rembrandt that really kind of were flagships for you?
The one that really hit me, oh gosh, I think just his self-portraits, the lighting in his self-portraits.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just how he draws you in and you feel like you're sitting right in front of him. I think that's really, that's really what got me. So just his use of lighting.
Yeah. You've done a lot of, I don't know what you call that, like when you draw, like not just him, but you did all the presidents. You started drawing all them, their faces.
All the presidents.
Yeah. So I think you like the faces.
Yeah.
The portrait stuff is really cool to me. Just the different things you can do with a face. And so I remember doing that one summer.
Yeah, that's right.
Like 6th grade, I drew all the presidents. I don't know.
I can draw Garfield. That's it. That's all I can do. And I practiced it over and over to be able to do that.
Yeah. Speaking of Rembrandt, you wrote a book called Rembrandt is in the Wind. And I just love this book. And there's a moment when you start out the book talking about 3 transcendentals. So tell us
Mhm.
about the transcendentals and how they affect our lives.
So the three transcendentals, this is a term that philosophers use for the triad of truth, beauty, and goodness. And what's distinct about truth, beauty, and goodness is that these are three pursuits that are common only to human beings. So we're the only creatures on the planet that pursue a deeper knowledge of truth, who pursue a moral sense of goodness and have a moral sense of goodness and evil, and people who engage with beauty for beauty's sake. And that's part of what differentiates humans from the rest of creation, and part of also what reflects back that statement in Genesis 1 that we're created in the image of God. That part of being made in the image of God is that there are pursuits and values that human beings take on that are unique only to people, and that is the pursuit of truth, beauty, and goodness. And so art is one of those things that involves all three, but really kind of is more maybe dominant on the pursuit of beauty element of things, as opposed to something like books about philosophy or things like that might be focused more on the pursuit of truth or goodness. And so yeah, so those are three things that kind of taken together represent a lot of what it means to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned in the book that we tend to treat beauty different than goodness and truth, how do we treat beauty differently?
Well, this is a Western thing in a lot of ways, that as Western people, we can be very pragmatic. Let's get to the point, let's learn the lesson, let's apply the lesson. And even when it comes to things like reading scripture, we can read scripture as though, the point of reading scripture is to glean lessons from it. When in fact, the majority of scripture is written as narrative, it's storytelling. And Flannery O'Connor once said that, she said, a story is a way of saying something that can't be said in any other way. And I love that because I think in the West we can view stories as just kind of, I don't know, trifles, as things, as entertainment, as ways to distract ourselves, or from the business of learning. When in fact we are gatherers of stories, we're collectors of stories. When the Lord was telling the people of Israel in the wilderness how to raise their children, he said, tell them stories. Tell them where they come from, tell them about the plagues, tell them about the Passover, tell them about me. And even Jesus, his primary method of teaching was parables. There was a man who had two sons, and so in the West, we can look at all that and say, well, okay, but what's the point? What's the lesson? When the truth is that sometimes the story is a Trojan horse that slips a lot of things past our defenses, because it's just, we lean in, we want to hear stories, we want to know them, but they also have a complexity to them where there's often more than just one point, or there's a nuance and a complexity, or a sometimes even the absence of a clear point is the point. Is that this is, you're just always going to have this kind of complexity in your life. And so art and beauty is a way of telling stories. When you look at a Rembrandt painting, you're looking not just at a still frame, but you're looking at a story. And even the way that Rembrandt and other great painters paint, they lead your eye through their canvas in a sequence. Like your eye goes one place first, and then to another place, and then to another place, and it's like you're turning pages in a book, even though you don't really realize you're doing it. You're looking in a sequence at a painting, and they're telling a story, and they're using beauty to engage parts of your mind, parts of your brain, parts of your heart, that would be different if somebody just tried to describe the painting to you. The way that color and light and darkness and facial expressions and eye contact and things that are expected and things that are unexpected. All of these things kind of weave this narrative drama together, so that when you engage with a work of art, part of the beauty is kind of doing that Trojan horse thing of slipping past the walls of your defense into the heart of who you are. Yeah.
Well, and taking that chance, like you talked about in the West, I think we're obsessed with being productive. So I need to, like you're saying, I've got to read this and I've got to apply exactly what I need right now, and then I can just move on. Yeah. Instead of taking that breath and just, like you said, maybe there's no point to this story. Maybe it's just for me to relax and take this in. And it's just,
that's part of the function.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the function of art, is to slow us down.
Yeah.
You know, is to consume a lot of our bandwidth. You know, like I talk about when I go to an art museum, I usually experience what I call museum feet, which is that feeling when you're in a museum where it feels like your feet are set in cinder blocks before too long, and it's just hard. You're like, why is it so hard for me to just even walk around? It's because we're image bearers of God who are meant to be in the presence of glory, but also in our fallenness, that being in the presence of glory consumes a part of us. It taxes us, it drains us. And so when we go into museums where you have these works of art that have, you know, stood the test of time for hundreds of years and have demonstrated their worthiness of being on the walls of these places where people give up vacation days and travel halfway around the world just to be in their presence.
Yeah.
They take something from us when we're in their presence. They draw from us that hunger for glory that is in us, that's in all the Psalms. You know, David talked about wanting to experience the glory of the Lord. That when we're in the presence of beautiful things, whether it's an art museum or the Grand Canyon or whatever, and we just we feel ourselves almost like a video game character where our energy is just depleting. That's part of how God made us to be, in the presence of glory, and beauty has this beautiful way of exhausting us in the most redemptive and helpful way of giving us rest and contentment and at the same time.
I've never thought about that, but you're right. I mean, I can go spend time in a museum and walk out feeling tired, and I've never thought about that before. So do you like have to gear yourself up? Do you have like 6 cup coffee? Like, what do you do to gear yourself up to go into a museum?
You know, what I do is, I mean, I gear myself up with coffee just to enter any day of the week, you know.
That's normal.
But yeah, that's normal. Usually when I go to a museum, I go looking for my friends, meaning Van Gogh and Rembrandt, and I have a few others. And I will give my first attention to them. I'll walk past a whole lot of stuff when I go into a museum, to find my people. And then when I find them, I let them introduce me around. And if anything on my way catches my eye that I want to circle back to, yeah, part of my strategy for entering a museum is to know I'm not going to take in this whole museum in one visit. Okay. And if I have to leave a lot of stuff unseen or unengaged with, that's just the cost of doing business, right? That's and so I'll kind of give the energy that I've got to the places I want to give it most. And let myself be surprised along the way by other things. I think that's another part of the Western mindset is we feel like, you know, we need to do the museum in a day. You know, you need to go to, you'll spend the morning at the Louvre, and then you'll go across the street and spend the afternoon at the Musée d'Orsay, you know, and like, what are we talking about? This is, you can't take in that much in one day. And also Paris. You know, you just can't. We can't.
You just can't. Yeah, but I do think you're right. I mean, we tend to go. We've spent this money. We've got to see everything.
We've got 3 hours to get through this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So we watched a Netflix show, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was on the Isabel and Jack Gardner heist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw that too.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that heist, and then tell us what about them?
Yeah, so the documentary is about an art heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, in March of 1990, St. Patrick's Day, the night after the wee small hours of the morning after St. Patrick's Day. Two thieves dressed as Boston police officers got buzzed into that museum by the security guards. They were then, the security guards were then handcuffed, and then these two people dressed as police officers spent the next 81 minutes taking 13 works of art out of the museum, worth an estimated $500 million, which was the largest single property theft in American history at the time. I don't know if it's been beat yet, because that was like 33 years ago, but I mean, it's incredible. And none of that art has been recovered. There is a $10 million reward, I think, for a tip leading to its return, and it's just crickets. And so the museum itself was put together by Isabella Stewart Gardner, who she and her husband were wealthy, and they would collect art from around the world, folk art and fine art. And then she lost her husband, and as a part of her grief, she built this museum kind of in his honor, but also she said that she was trying to build something that wouldn't die. And part of doing that is she put this permanent collection together, and in the bylaws of the museum, she stipulated that nothing can ever be added or taken away from this museum. And if anybody ever tried to do that in the trust, that the whole collection would have to be liquidated and given to Harvard. Wow. And so when the theft happened, the Rembrandt Storm on the Sea of Galilee painting, which is the only seascape that Rembrandt ever painted, it was cut out of its frame with a knife, and presumably rolled up and taken out into the night. And and because of that stipulation in the trust for the museum, the frame for that painting is still hanging on the wall. And so if you go to that museum, you can go stand in front of the empty frame that used to hold the Storm on the Sea of Galilee painting. And so it's a fascinating, the museum is a fascinating thing in and of itself, because she regarded it as its own work of art, that the museum as a whole was that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that story really drew me in. I was fascinated by the painting, by the heist, by the absence of any of its return. It's such it doesn't bode well for the future of that art, that $10 million is on the table and nobody has been able to produce a useful tip.
Or nobody's trying to sell it or anything.
That's one thing we talk about. We're like, why would you sell this? You can't ever get rid of it. You can't ever let anybody know that you have this. So
right. In that chapter in the book, I go into a little bit about what happens with stolen art, because in our minds, if we don't know anything about it, you think you steal a $50 million painting and you try to sell it for $50 million, but that's not really what anybody does. It turns out it's more valuable as a currency, because the international laws regarding stolen art are way less severe than bank fraud. Or something like that, and also you can't. The penalties are very low if you can demonstrate, even if you're in the possession of stolen art, if you can demonstrate that you didn't steal it, or you can even make a case that you didn't know it was stolen. And so what'll happen is somebody will steal art, and then they will use it as a kind of a black market currency, where they'll trade it to, say, an arms dealer for guns, and then the arms dealer will trade it to a drug dealer for drugs, and by the two or three people down the line, the painting is in effect been laundered, and it's not in the hands of the people who stole it. And so now they can sell it on the black market, and whoever buys it is not at a great risk of being penalized in any way, because even if it gets found, they may lose it. It may have to get returned. But they can say, I didn't know it was stolen, or I didn't steal it. Here's where I was when that happened. And so, so those kinds of things end up being what happens with a lot of, usually it's organized crime. There's one quote that I read from a security detail, a security director at a museum, who said a lot of art theft is not, it's not the Thomas Crown affair. It's more like a Coen Brothers movie. That usually the people doing the thieving don't have a clear sense of really what it is that they're taking.
Yeah.
A lot of times. Now, sometimes that's not the case, but a lot of times, they're just trying to get away with something or do what they're told.
Yeah. Wow.
So in that, you mentioned the Rembrandt painting, Storm of Galilee, and that's kind of where the centerpiece of your book comes. So why did you decide to make that the centerpiece of your book?
Well, one, because I love Rembrandt. Two, because I feel like Rembrandt's familiar. He's a familiar enough painter that, whatever I named the book after, I wanted it to have as broad an appeal as possible. And so, but also I like that painting in particular, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, is such a fascinating painting, not only because of the theft around it. The title for the book is kind of a play on words. It has a double meaning. The first meaning is, when something is stolen and unrecovered, law enforcement will describe that thing as being in the wind. And so the Rembrandt painting was in the wind. But then in the painting, Rembrandt painted himself into the boat. So he is in the storm on the Sea of Galilee looking, and he's the one who's looking out at the viewer. And so in that sense, he's also in the wind. He's in the storm in the boat. And so so it's a play on words, but I a lot of what I talk about in that chapter kind of threads through with the other stories that are told there in the book as well.
Why did Rembrandt paint himself in his pictures so much?
It's a way, a lot of artists would do this and still do. It's a way of breaking the fourth wall. It's a way of for the artist to draw the viewer into the scene that he's making. And so usually if you see a character in a painting who's directly looking at the viewer, and it's not a portrait, but it's just some scene and one of the characters is looking at you, the odds are pretty good that it's the artist who's painting themselves in, and they're engaging with you and they're asking you to come in as well. So with Rembrandt, he's putting himself in the boat, which, if you remember that passage, what the disciples are asking Jesus is, don't you care that we're perishing here? Which is just drenched in irony, right? That they're asking the second person of the Trinity, incarnate in the flesh, who had come for the purpose of laying down his life for us, to take the wage of sin upon himself so that we wouldn't die. They're asking him, don't you care that we're dying? And yes, there is, yes, he does. But and so Rembrandt is asking us, when he's looking at us, you're in the storm too. That's what he's telling us. Don't you care that we're perishing? And so that's what artists usually are doing when they paint themselves in, is they're inviting the viewer more intimately into the composition.
Yeah. And what a beautiful story to invite someone into, the gospel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so in the book you go through different artists and you kind of give an overview of their lives and how it interacts with their art and all that. Another one that really hit me was Van Gogh, and I know that's one of your favorites too. You said he did like 130 paintings a year. That's crazy.
Yeah. So he painted like 860 paintings over the course of his career, oil paintings. That doesn't count sketches, watercolors, letters. And he painted for 9 years, and only 9 years, and the vast majority of those 860 paintings came in the last 4 years of his life. So for the last 3 years of his life, he was averaging a painting every 3 days. And then in the last 3 months of his life, in 1890, he was averaging one complete painting a day. And that was the pace he was working at. Yeah, it's crazy to think about. And these aren't like, little thumbnail paintings. These are the ones in museums that you go and see, and they're the Van Goghs that we think about.
It's like a masterpiece a day.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. And in the process of doing this, he only sold one. He and that's what the chapter is about, is kind of he struck me as the striving man in Ecclesiastes, who is laboring and toiling under the sun and seeing no fruit from his labor and wondering what it's all worth, and yet he's doing something that's transcendent and eternal. And so he never saw the fruit of his work. But he's a household name around the world now. And part of it is not, and it's not because, boy, he just painted really cool paintings. It's because his paintings are filled with ache and suffering and sorrow and hope and an eye for loneliness and brokenness and love and all these things. And then you have this body of letters that he's written that are kind of is a history of all of the paintings that he painted, and he wrote about a lot of them, and he drew sketches of many of these, and so we know down to the month, sometimes even the day when he painted a lot of his paintings. There's a great website that's I forget the name of it, but you can search Van Gogh Painting Archive, and it has all of his paintings and when they were painted, and usually a reference to the letter that it's mentioned in, if it's mentioned there somewhere. So he's fascinating because his art is connected to his story, and it wasn't that long ago, and we have so much information.
Can you tell us the story of the painting that he did sell? Because I know a lot of people know that he wasn't very successful while he was alive, but just talk about that one painting that he did sell. Yeah,
it's called The Red Vineyard. If you would like to go see it, all you need to do is go to Moscow, Russia, and it's there in the Pushkin Museum. And it's what's interesting about it.
Now.
Well, I know, yeah, you got to have some pluck. You got to have some pluck if you want to go. If you want to go see it, it's one of the things that drew me to it. It was one of my favorite paintings before I knew the story behind it. I'd flip through a Van Gogh book, and whenever I'd see that painting, my eye would just be drawn to it, because it's different in that it's red. It's mostly red and yellow, and what we think of Van Gogh is blue, his blues and yellows. And it was of him seeing a harvest in the south of France called the Vintage, where they would harvest the grapes, and he kind of wrote some notes about it in a letter to his brother, and then he went and painted it from memory. And it's just a breathtaking image. And it was from 1888, so it was 2 years before he died. It was displayed at an exhibition in Brussels in 1890, the winter of 1890, the early part of the year, and so he knew of its sale, and had this delightfully modest thing that he said to his mother. He said, basically, I sold a painting. It didn't sell for much, but it's something, and it helps me. It'll help me continue on with my work, which is such a crazy thing to say. If for at that point 7 or 8 years you've been laboring at painting your brother's an art dealer who receives all of your work, and still you haven't broken through. And a lot of that was just what the art market in Paris, it wasn't ready for what he was doing. His work was not popular. In fact, Starry Night, which is, if people know anything about Van Gogh, they know two things. They know that he painted Starry Night and that he cut off his ear. Those are the two. That's the starter kit for knowing Vincent van Gogh. Mm-hmm. And he hated Starry Night. He felt like he knew that he was trying to paint something that would be commercially popular. Mm-hmm. And the way I describe it is he was an indie artist trying to write a pop song. Mm-hmm. And he knew it. And
he was selling out, basically.
Yeah. And so he wrote to his brother of it kind of in a very self-deprecating way of like, I'm never going to do that again. And what's interesting about that is we think of Van Gogh's style as Starry Night, these swirling stars, and really there's not a lot of that. There's a lot of it's all the heavy brushwork, but that swirling cloud star kind of thing it's the only nightscape that he did like that. Mm-hmm. And there's some others that are daylight where you did clouds in a similar way. But that painting really kind of stands apart from everything else that he did. as being really unusual, and yet it's the one that we most associate with his style.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a really non-artsy person question, but you've got Van Gogh. Did he have any descendants, any lineage? No, nothing. So, so what happens when you have that kind of fame after you're dead with any this? There's just no money from that going anywhere around his people. Like,
well, yeah, there is his brother Theo, and his and his and Theo's wife collected all of his letters,
okay.
all of his paintings. And so they had the collection after he died. And right after he died, he was in the process of becoming a very famous painter. He was becoming esteemed by other painters in Europe while he was still alive. People were really taking note of him and starting to really take interest in what he was doing. But he never lived to see that come to fruition. But between 1890, when he died, and the turn of the century, his work was shown in exhibitions all around Paris. He became one of the most celebrated painters in Europe by the turn of the century. Then in the 30s, Irving Stone got a hold of copies of the letters and wrote his two kind of historical fiction books, Lust for Life and Dear Theo, which are both Dear Theo is more of a narrative adaptation of the letters, and Lust for Life is a historical novel based on the letters, but not in letter form. And then just 20, 30 years after that, Kirk Douglas is playing him in a Technicolor movie based on Irving Stone's book. And he just, he didn't see it. But his brother's family became the curators, I guess, of Van Gogh's body of work. And now it's been distributed around the world, and it's really not for sale anymore. It's kind of most all of it is now in the company of or in the custody of museums, where it won't really be on the market probably. There's not a lot in private collections.
Yeah. That's a great question. I've never thought about who made all this money off of Van Gogh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned that he was striving, and he didn't see the greatness that he was going to be. And I think that's kind of how we are. I don't, like you talked about in the book, I don't think he saw his value. He was searching to find some value in himself. So how is that I think that's a universal thing. How do we discover value in ourselves?
Yeah, I think Van Gogh actually is a really good case study for thinking about this, because what a Christian would say is that the value of personhood is not something that we go out and obtain. It's something that we're born with, as image bearers of God, that because we're made in his image, we have inherent dignity. We have value and worth that is beyond measure, and we always will. And so we may suffer and struggle through life, contribute nothing of note, and still we are of incalculable worth because we bear the image of God as people. What a lot of Western thinking is, well, really, to achieve greatness, I need to hit it big with something. I need to make a mark in some way. And so, I will write the great American novel, or I will invent, this device that will change people's lives, or I will champion this cause and see something change. With Van Gogh, the reason that he's celebrated in the way that he is not because of the Red Vineyard or Starry Night or sunflowers or whatever. It's the body of work. It's the body of work that people celebrate, and the reason that people celebrate the body of work from Van Gogh, and not just this painting or that painting, is because really the art that he left behind is the story of who he was, his struggle to find his struggle to live in a world that he found to be beautiful and that he wanted to contribute beauty to, that didn't seem to want to recognize anything from him. One of his things that he said is he said, I am, he said, a great fire burns within me and passersby only see a wisp of smoke. And that, boy, if that's not Ecclesiastes, I don't know what is, right? That's him saying, look, there's so much that's inside of me that I'm trying to give to the world, and he's giving it to the world through these canvases. But it's like what Jesus said about himself. He said, I came unto my own and my own did not receive me. That there's a Van Gogh's life certainly parallels that statement. One of the things that's just a testimony of Van Gogh's work is that to see irises or sunflowers or Starry Night or Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear, you're looking at a portion of this body of work from this complicated, transcendent artist whose life was filled with meaning and struggle and suffering and hope and all of those things that are so common to the human experience. And it's that we celebrate rather than the pot of sunflowers.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we all are complex, and most people don't see everything that we have to offer inside, just like him. I mean, that's very relatable. What you just said, very relatable to me. So I don't go to a lot of museums like he does, or I
usually take you with me.
Yes, and he wants to stop and read everything. I get a little more nervous about going because I here's why I get nervous. I feel like I'm going to miss something important. I feel like I'm going to walk through and people are going to say, be standing in a picture and looking at it, and I'm going to say, I don't get it. And I am trying to find, what is it that you're getting? So how does a person like me go about enjoying a museum? What's my game plan?
Okay. First is make peace with the fact that you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss big stuff.
Yeah, you've already mentioned that when you said you're not going to see everything. I'm like, oh no, I've got the map. Like I usually am like, we've got a plan. So that is great advice.
Yeah, you don't have the bandwidth for that. Nobody does.
Thank you.
And
I feel released from that.
So abandon hope of seeing everything, all ye who enter here. You're just not gonna.
I needed that.
I think I think it's the understanding that one, it's this way with movies, books, art, poetry, is that the stuff that if you were to go around and ask 50 people, what is your favorite work of art? It can be a book, a movie, a painting, sculpture, poem, whatever. Everybody's going to have a different answer. And a lot of that is going to have to do with when they encountered that particular piece of art and why it connected with them. And so you may walk past a painting that there's a crowd of people around, and they're around it for a reason, and it may do nothing for you. And that is completely okay. Because maybe it's just not time for you to connect with that piece of art. And maybe it'll never be time for you to connect with that piece of art. But then you'll go around a corner and you'll see something and it'll take your breath away, or it'll bring tears to your eyes. And it's because it's intersecting with something that's going on inside of you then. That transcends. And this is one of the things that I believe very strongly about humans and art. And I alluded to it earlier, but it's that we build and curate our own collections over time. Pieces of art that we've seen, records we've listened to, that when you think of that record, you think of it as one of yours. And then there are other records that exist, but they're not one of yours, and there are paintings that exist, but like Munch's The Scream, for example, is a painting that I know about. I've known about it for years. It's not one of mine. The Red Vineyard, though, is, and Storm on the Sea of Galilee is. And Salvador Dali, I know them and I think they're interesting, but they're other people's paintings. And so we do that. And so when we're going to a museum, part of what I'm doing is I'm just kind of adding to my collection, and so I will leave the museum with a few things that I've picked up that will now kind of reside in the gallery art, if you will. And so, I think also it's just a good exercise in being a person who exists in space and time. It's a good exercise to have to wrestle with the experience of leaving things on the table, of being able to say, I have limits, I have capacity, and it means that I may go to one of the most celebrated museums in the world and not see one of the most celebrated works of art in the world.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back, or maybe I'll just, here's an example of that in my own life that I laugh at a lot. Is back when I was in college, this was before the internet was everywhere. It was 1994. I was in college and I spent a semester in Israel. And on the way to Israel from the US, we had a 12-hour layover in Amsterdam, which is where Van Gogh is from. And I knew Van Gogh was from there. But I didn't know anything about museums in Amsterdam, except for one thing. And I knew that there was a wax museum, Madame Tussauds, in Amsterdam. And so the plane landed at 7. Our flight took off at 7 in the morning. Our flight to Tel Aviv took off at 7 at night. This was pre 9/11, so you could leave the airport at will. I was like, I've got 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to explore Amsterdam. I'm going to Madame Tussauds because I am certain they're going to have a statue of Van Gogh, which they did. And I got a picture of myself with my arm around this dumb statue of Van Gogh, not realizing that I'm 3 blocks away from the Van Gogh Museum.
Oh,
wow.
gosh.
Right there.
Yeah.
And then I got on the plane and left, and haven't been back. And I live with that now. I've got that dumb picture. In fact, I might email it to you just so your listeners.
That'd be great.
No, that would be great.
That'd be great. Oh,
it's just, I laugh at it so much, just thinking, oh gosh.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. So we live with the limits, right? We live within the limits of navigating this world.
Absolutely.
And that's an example from my life.
Yeah, you've given me a lot to think about. You've given me some things that are going to push me a little bit too, like not having a map, not having a plan, and and you know what? The other thing too is I think often I would be like, that is really I love this. Come look at it. Don't you think it's cool? But now I understand like why he might not think it's as cool as I think it is, and so I love that.
I'm a big fan of the map, and I'm a big fan of reading the things on the wall.
Yeah.
But it's just trying to take in the museum in a day is where I'm like, you can't do it. I think too, it is one of the reasons I wrote the book is because when I start talking about art with people, one of the common experiences is people will react kind of like, oh, I don't do art. I don't get it. As though there's some sort of academic hurdle we have to clear before we can really enjoy art. Yeah. And I want to help people understand that it is a very valid form of art criticism to look at a painting and say, I like this one. Or to look at a painting and say, I don't like this one much. That's valid. It's you don't have to know why. You can be curious and maybe look into why. What's the distance between you and that painting, but you can just take it at face value and give yourself the time, the number of your days to become more familiar with how art does its work inside of you, rather than feel like, well, I have to understand the history of Holland. You don't. You can get there if you want to, but you don't have to. You can just look at the painting and take it in.
Yeah, that's true. So Russ, you could drop everything today and go to any museum. Where would you go? You could just drop.
I would go to
Amsterdam.
Yeah, I would go to the I'd go to I would go to the Academy in Florence to see Michelangelo's David.
Okay.
That's the work of art that I feel most urgently drawn to. And I don't have a plan necessarily to get there yet.
Yeah.
And I've never been in person to see Michelangelo's David. But it's I have a ridiculous thing that I say about Michelangelo's David that, and I know it's a ridiculous thing, but I say it as often as I can just to get a rise out of people and see if anybody will refute the claim. And I'll tell you guys now what
Yeah,
that is.
I'm
And
ready.
that is, I believe that Michelangelo's David is the single greatest artistic achievement in the history of humanity.
Wow.
That's the claim. A couple caveats.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite work of art. It's not even, it might be in my top 10. But in terms of the achievement, what was accomplished in Michelangelo's David, I can't come up with anything that beats it. I think about, the duration of the 500 plus years that it stood, and never has it not been revered as one of the greatest sculptures ever made. You can't present a painting and say, no, it's this, because we're talking about achievement, and paintings are two-dimensional and this is three-dimensional. You can't bring me a bronze sculpture or a clay sculpture, because that's a medium where you can add to, you can make mistakes. But with marble, you can't. And marble is purely subtraction. You're only taking away. You can't add back to it. And so if you make a mistake, it's made. And then the final thing for me is that he's nude. And so a lot of times people will be like, what about the Pietà? And I will say, well, one, it's Michelangelo, so I'm kind of even half right already. But two, they're draped in robes, and so there's a lot that you can do with that, where you don't have to get the human anatomy exactly right.
Yeah.
But with David, because he's nude, if there's something off about the musculature of his arm, or the proportion of the shoulder blades in his back, or the way that his ankle is formed, your eye will immediately go to it, and the uncanny valley will open, and you'll say, well, this is, and it's perfect. He's perfect. And there's no, like, because we're humans looking at a human, there's no disguising the precision of the figure of David. And so all of those things together, I'm like, I just can't, so I know it's a ridiculous thing to say. I know that art is subjective, blah, blah, blah. I know all of that.
Yeah.
But I welcome the challenge.
Well, I have a similar opinion to you. It's like, yeah, I think it is perfect, and I think it is that, but I think just like you, I don't even know if it's in my top 10. I totally appreciate it. But I think, and while you were talking, I was thinking, why don't I appreciate it more? And I think maybe for me, it's too perfect. Like, I would lean more to the impressionist, like, idea of painting or sculpture, and maybe a little more extreme and all that. So it's so perfect that I'm like, it kind of disconnects with me.
Yeah.
Because it's so on the nose, I guess.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book just devoted to that statue.
Yeah.
And his face, his eyes. I don't understand how that.
Well, especially thinking it's a block of marble and you're chiseling into it, and like you say, you can't make a mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't use a hot glue gun.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's right. You can't.
Well, Russ, we really enjoyed your book, and we've really enjoyed this conversation with you. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I just love digging into your brain. You've given me a lot to think about. You're pushing me out of my boundaries. I think it's time to go to a museum. I want to collect more things into my catalog.
Yeah. Well, and for me, with the book, I just want to thank you for writing the book, because you talked about how art makes you want to slow down and think. And that after I finished each chapter of the book, I would slow down and go, instead of just trying to finish the book really fast, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to take 2 or 3 things you said in this chapter and just think about it for a few days. And it was really meaningful for me to take that time to think instead of just rushing through it. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate all of that. Just remember, you have the rest of your life to engage with art, and so there's no hurry. And what's on the other side is going to be more beautiful anyway. And so it's not a race.
Yes, yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you taking time with us today, Russ.
Thank
And
you.
we, I'm sure Scott is going to just nerd out about this conversation for a while.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah,
We
thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes. Have a wonderful day, Russ.
All right, you too.
Thank you.
Take care.
Well, I've been saying it for a number of years, babe.
What's that?
You're worth more dead than you are alive.
Wow. So that's what you got out of this talk
Yes.
with Russ Ramsey.
That's right. I've seen your office. I know all the art you produce in there. And once you're gone, babe, we'll be banking.
I'm afraid to tell you that I don't think you're gonna get that much for what's on my
What?
wall.
You're a brilliant artist.
Okay. Not to the scope of the people we talked about today.
Well, you just wait and see, because I will promote you after you're dead. Is that a weird thing to say?
You're gonna be like Van Gogh's brother. It's like, hey, look what I got here. Well, I guess I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think you're so talented. And
Yeah.
I love to watch you kind of geek out over art. It's kind of cool that your brain like works in those ways.
Yeah. And I love how we talked about how art I think it's innately part of us.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm not an art guy and all that, but I think we innately have something in us that appreciates beauty.
Yeah.
And it's in different forms. Like we talked about at the beginning, it's like, it could be museums, it could be cathedrals, it could be cars, there's so many things that we can see beauty in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did love that he talked about the three things that only humans connect with, because it was kind of weird as he was talking about that. I'm looking at our dog that lays on the bed right there while we podcast, and I'm thinking,
Security dog.
yeah, security.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand beauty like a human would understand beauty. He doesn't understand the truth. You know what I'm saying? Like the things that he was talking about, I was like, that is so incredibly true. And so I love that, he just kind of pushed us to engage with beauty in a way that only humans can do.
So I would totally tell everyone to read Russ's book. Rembrandt is in the Wind.
Yeah.
You can get it. I got it on audiobook for 1 credit. Or you can, I love having the physical book, but I was like, I want to read this one. I want to read it now. So I got it on audiobook.
Yeah.
And also on his Instagram, Russ has Art Wednesdays. Where he picks an artist and then shows their paintings or their sculptures and kind of talks about their life. So that's pretty fascinating too.
You can learn a lot there.
Yep.
He's a pretty cool guy. And we hope you enjoyed this interview with Russ Ramsey. Party at 5 1/2. Over and out.
We'll see you next time. I hope.